Good afternoon. It is Saturday at 4 o'clock, so it must be time for the Senior Moment. This is Connie Clark with Home Helpers, and I have two people in the studio with me today. We are going to be talking about elderly folks and suicide. I have Catherine Peruse. She is with the Suicide Prevention Action Network, and she traveled down here from Sandpoint to visit us. And I also have Al Home with me, and he is our local suicide expert, should I say?
I don't know about expert.
And so we're going to talk about seniors and suicides. And we were just looking at some of the statistics, and one of the highest or the highest rate of suicides is elderly people.
Yes. The elderly make up 12.5% of the population nationwide, yet they account for almost 15.7% of all suicides.
And so far as the demographics of suicides, are they the highest age group population?
No. They are not. They're getting there because of so many, people.
All of us approaching
right.
that.
The highest rate for seniors is between 75 and 84 males.
And I had read something that the reason for that is it's usually after the death of a spouse who's always cared for them, or is that?
A lot of different things that can tie in. It can be widowed, that definitely plays into it. Deteriorating health, pain can play a big role in it. Being alone, they're vulnerable. All those things play into a sense that isolation and play into a sense of hopelessness.
And they just want to give up.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen so many times in the newspapers where they talk about a murder-suicide, that maybe one of the people is caring for a spouse who has Alzheimer's or something, and it just gets to the point where they don't want to do this anymore.
Right.
And that seems to be something really prevalent, you see.
It's a difficult place to be in, to have a spouse that is sinking into Alzheimer's or any kind of dementia and know that you're the only person that can care for them.
And you've done that for
88 years old.
Yeah, and you've done that for 60, 70 years.
Yep. It's a terrible place to be in.
What can we do about that? I mean, is there anything we can do? Because you see so many seniors alone. And I know they're probably going deep down into that dungeon, and it's hard to come out. What do you do about it? Can you do anything?
Has she got about 6 hours we can tell her?
Well, I mean, I know for a fact, I know people that are down there,
Yeah.
What can you do? Can you do anything?
It's difficult. My own parents are there, and I don't know what to do. They've locked themselves into their house. They don't ever go out. They've isolated themselves from their friends, and it's incredibly difficult. So I wish I had an answer to that. What they need is interaction with people, obviously, but I'm not sure how you bring that into the homes of homebound people.
Yeah, and I think, from my viewpoint, one of the issues we need to address is to look at, if we can, with proper diagnosis, some of the primary causes of suicide ideation. As you mentioned, quite a number of them. Also, males are more likely to suicide than females. And ethnicity can trace into that. More white males kill themselves than other non-whites. Another one that can be a serious problem, needs to be addressed, is self-medication with alcohol. That gets to be a real problem amongst suicidal people.
And you see that a lot, especially our veterans who are trying to numb themselves from those memories during that time.
Yep. They do the alcohol, from the ones I've talked with, because it works. You get drunk, and for a while you forget about it, and you can handle it. But then you sober up, and it's worse.
And it's back.
Yeah. Terminal illness can be a major factor. People in terminal illness need really well-trained hospice care, where suicide no longer is necessarily an issue. Recent divorce or death, as you mentioned. So there are a lot of factors, and I think we should, and I don't know how we're going to do it, have people who are trained well enough to recognize these problems and get proper intervention.
Because once you get to be that age, like you talked about, they can have a very well laid out plan. They know exactly what drugs are going to interact with what drugs to cause the effect they want. They're able to go out and buy firearms. No one's going to question them because, especially up here, it's hunting, and so they can put together some pretty elaborate plans and actually complete the act versus a younger person may not know all those things.
Yeah. And that's very, very common, at least from the experience I've had with the seniors, and I'm one of them. The medication, a very, very common method for seniors to use. I'm not saying it's the only method, but they will save their medications until they have enough that they know they have a lethal dose, and then they'll over-medicate, go to bed, and when they find them, there's no signs of trauma, nothing to indicate suicide. And in the past, working with coroners, Dr. West and Jody and different people, there are a lot of these deaths that are probably suicide, but they're not listed as suicide because there's no indication that it was. But yet they've taken the 3 bottles of pills.
Wow.
And they find them asleep in their bed in an assisted living center. There's no reason to do an autopsy, and it doesn't happen. So
another method of passive suicide is stopping taking your medication.
yes.
So if you have extremely high blood pressure and you refuse to take your blood pressure medication, all of those things, it's not going to be too long before something fatal is going to happen.
So actually the rate is probably a lot higher than what we think, just because what
Absolutely.
you're saying here.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh my heavens.
Yeah, those things. And I think along with the seniors, an issue that I've run across is a big one amongst so many seniors, especially those that have lost a spouse through death or whatever, and losing them to Alzheimer's is just as traumatic as losing them to a physical death. But they have this issue, they don't want to be a problem to their children and their survivors. And so the easy way out for them in their thinking is suicide.
If I just go away, then they won't have to bother with me.
And burdensomeness is some evidence that has surfaced recently in a lot of research about suicide, regardless of age.
Wow. I have thought about it, when thinking of seniors and why they do it, because looking up information to talk to you all. But some of the things you're bringing up, I hadn't even thought about, like either saving up your medications or stopping it, and the doctors pronouncing them dead, heart failure or whatever. And so they don't do an autopsy to see that that really wasn't what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And there has been a tendency in the past for coroners to, if in doubt, list it as natural causes or accidental. That is changing. So our data has been skewed to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's substantially higher, the rates are.
Yeah, because a lot of people are found in their bed or, and you just think, well, they went to bed and went to sleep and that was it.
Right. Some of the research in a recent article showed that senior suicides tend to be more effective, is a horrible word to use, but they're very well thought out, very well planned, and thus the accomplished death is achieved.
Good grief. So if you have, again, I'm going to go back to if you have a parent that you're seeing being depressed and going down that hole, what do you say to them? Do you let them continue down the hole, or what do you do?
Encourage treatment of symptoms of depression. That's very difficult to do, though, with our seniors.
Yes.
Very difficult. And just bring what you can into, their lives to keep them motivated and interested and activities. I don't have a good answer. I wish I did, believe me.
Yeah, I wish I did too. One of the things that I've used with my own mother and with some of the other seniors, it gets off the end of looking at treatment per se. Professional hospice care is always good, but with the family members, I think, to me personally, that it's really important is to let that family member know that you care. They're not a burden. And being a minister, I always have to preach love. Let them know that you still love them. And you're not there because they're a burden to you. Lots of visits, lots of time with them, and just talking with them. And be able to, if you can, talk about the end-of-life issues, whether it be suicide, natural death, or whatever. It's approaching. When you get to be my age, you're looking at, not that it might happen, but it's going to happen.
And it's closer than it was last year.
Yes,
You know?
yeah, and increased age every year. The probability of suicide increases. But the palliative care that hospice teaches is good. But I think family care and letting them know that you really, really, really care. And one of the important things to me, and I got this from Dr. Quinnett, when you're talking to somebody about these things, about suicide issues, don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid to ask questions about it.
Like,
And as Dr. Quinnett,
have you thought about it? Is a question like that?
and there are certain ways to ask that question and the wrong ways to ask it. But I like what Dr. Quinnett taught me the very first class I had in '94. He says, do something, say something, because it's doing nothing and saying nothing that gets people killed.
So you would advocate bringing up the subject with them?
If you think it's an issue, it doesn't hurt to ask.
If you're concerned about it, absolutely. If it's crossed your mind, then you should ask the question. And if you can't ask the question, then find somebody that can.
Yes.
Because they may be calling for help and you're not listening?
You don't hear it because you're dealing with the doctor's visits, the medication. You're dealing with all this stuff and it's just kind of going by. But if it enters your mind, ask the question.
Ask the question, absolutely.
And I would think you would probably see more of that because if they're in a facility, if they're in a skilled nursing facility and assisted living, their medications are managed for them. Mm-hmm. But if they're home, then it's a whole different story.
I would suspect that in a facility, you would see more of the passive track of trying to end their life, of refusing to take medication. As opposed to,
saving it up.
away,
yeah,
and saving it up. I mean, I certainly know people who have saved it up in an institution,
just not taking it.
Right. You cheek it or whatever, and I mean, it's been done, and it's not all that tough. But more often, I suspect that it's more of a passive giving up, and then refusing to take the life-saving medications and those kind of things.
Interesting. And I was in one of the meetings that you were talking about suicides and the aftermath, what that does to the families. And I don't know if a person who's thinking, I'm a burden, maybe if I go, everything will be better, thinks about what happens to the families afterwards.
Even when a family has gone through it, such as my family, we have lost 2 children to suicide. You would think that the second one would have seen what it did to the family when the first one happened. But at the time, when one becomes that depressed, it closes in. It's like tunnel vision. All you can see is how you perceive yourself as being such a burden that even though they'd be sad, it'd be much better off without you. And a suicide in the family actually increases your risk because now it's a viable option.
Mm-hmm. They were able to do it, yeah.
Sure.
You know people. They've demonstrated that it's done. It's been done. It's right there in your face. So it like quadruples your risk within the family.
Really?
Instead of working
the other way. I didn't know that.
Another interesting aspect along that line, I believe, there's some research, when I belong to the American Association of Suicidology, research that indicates when people are into suicide ideation, one of the things that generally doesn't cross their mind, they don't think about suicide as a death issue. They're looking at suicide as a solution to the problem they have. And one thing about suicide, like Dr. Quinnett always says, suicide works. You complete suicide, your problems are gone, and people will look at that. So being dead is not necessarily what they want. They want to solve their problems.
Whatever those may be.
Or ease the pain that they're living in, whether it's psychological or physical.
Okay.
The pain stops
For them.
It's
For them.
For them.
For them. And unfortunately, they're in a place where their world has really telescoped down to what they're feeling and what they're thinking. The rest of the world is outside of that.
So they're not thinking, oh, well, if I commit this, everybody around me is going to be happy, or, they're not
It's
even
not an
thinking
issue
past
with them
that.
generally.
Yeah. That's kind of a sidebar. My pain will end is the primary, and a sense of hopelessness that this is the only option to end the pain, whether it's psychological or physical.
And that may not be the case.
May not be. If it's psychological, absolutely not. Depression is one of the most treatable medical illnesses there is.
And even a
Almost as-
senior.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The success rate on treating regular depression is upwards in the high 80%, I believe was the last statistic I saw. I wouldn't swear to it, but I believe that's what it was. So it's successfully treated very easily, similar to high blood pressure. That's pretty, we've got the standard treatments down. But it's still considered a weakness by many of our seniors to be depressed, particularly our males.
Okay. Well, I need to take a break, but I want to keep talking along this line because you're bringing up things I hadn't even thought about. I was just looking at the statistics. And when we start talking about how they're doing it and why they're doing it, that's really fascinating. So we will be right back. Again, this is Connie Clark with the Senior Moment. And I'm not going to touch anything. I did that once before and messed everything up.
So now you're recording all this.
Well, no, yeah, he's going to take it.
Oh, he cuts
He'll
it in.
cuts
I
it
see.
out.
I got it.
So I just don't touch anything.
But the suicide issue, as far as I'm concerned, is something you can study for a lifetime and still not know all the answers, I think.
Very interesting.
It's actually really depressing because I am living it right now
Oh,
with my parents.
Yes.
My mother has dementia, and my father's going to be 88, and it's not good.
I know, it's tough.
It's
I facilitate an Alzheimer's support group, and my dad had Alzheimer's. And I relive it every time I go to that support group.
Ever heard of a guy named Len Campbell?
Mm-hmm.
He had to cancel his last tour because of Alzheimer's.
Did he cancel
I
it?
can't even remember the songs anymore.
Oh, that's a shame. Okay, we ready?
Yep.
Ready? And we're back again. This is Connie Clark with Home Helpers, and we are on the Senior Moment. And I'm talking with Catherine Perouse with the Suicide Prevention Action Network. She came down here all the way from Sandpoint to be with us today. And Al Holm, he is what should I describe you as?
Retired.
But you've done a lot of work educating people on
Well,
suicide.
I've trained in
and that
suicide
sort of thing.
prevention. I've been a police chaplain, a minister, and church chaplain. And my whole career for the last nearly 40 years has been in volunteer and service, community service, so forth.
Okay.
And suicide issues is certainly one of those.
Definitely, definitely. And we were talking about the reaction or what happens to the family after the person has committed the act, and that they don't think that far in advance. They just know, like you said, that their pain is gone. And it's really hard for the families to come back from that, especially if it's I don't know, even if it was a violent or nonviolent act, it's still hard.
There's still a loss. It's a major issue with the survivors, loved ones of the suicide victims. It's grief and bereavement, and I went to particular training, and I sometimes get the opportunity to work with people, survivors, because it's a grief issue, and grief is the internal pain you feel from an external loss, and suicide certainly an external loss. And the worst suffering people I've worked with, when I was police chaplain for Coeur d'Alene Police Department, we had a young boy who went up on Tubbs Hill and hanged himself. And I went and had to do, as a chaplain, I got to do all the death notifications. And when I notified the mother, she just went off the deep end. Because suicide seems for some reason to be worse than murder, worse than car accidents and so forth. Very, very difficult.
Because it's self-inflicted, is that it, or?
No, I can kind of address that. Being a 2-time suicide survivor, I think it's with suicide, you feel that you should have had or could have had the ability to stop it.
I should have seen it coming.
Yeah.
Yes.
I should have done something. I very much felt that about my sons, that if your, mothers take care of their children. And if your children completed suicide, obviously I did not do my job. And as a daughter, if something happens to my parents and they're so unhappy, I have not done my job not only am I grieving the loss of my parents, but I did not do my job very well.
And that can bring in not only the pain of grief, but guilt. Boy, have you probably seen a lot of people.
And it takes years to overcome that guilt.
If you can overcome it at all.
Years to overcome it.
And I've even worked with people that have gone from guilt, which says I did something wrong, into a feeling of, gee, I didn't do something wrong, but I am something wrong. And that gets even deeper into it, and boy, it's difficult to work.
And so then I can see what you said, that you would have a higher rate within families, because then you think, well, they were able to do it, and their pain is gone. Maybe I should do that now, too.
It just becomes it's a desensitization to it.
Yes.
Suicide's a huge taboo in our society. So once it's been broached within a family, that taboo level has been dramatically dropped.
The line's been erased.
Right. And so now it's a viable option.
And it's getting better, I've noticed, in society. 10 years ago, or in 94, when I started training with Dr. Connie, at that point, you didn't talk about suicide. It was kind of like sex in 1945. You didn't talk about it.
But it was there.
But it was there. Suicide is here, but we are more and more people that are getting involved and doing things to work with this problem. And you mentioned a while ago, what can we do to help it? And I think the QPR that I've learned from Dr. Quinette and that a lot of these people teach is extremely important. And QPR means question, persuade, and refer. And in that training that I got from Dr. Quinette, there is a whole list of suicide ideations, behaviors, and warning signs. And I think all the people that are working in assisted living centers or doing anything with seniors, if there was some way we could get that training out so they can recognize the problem and then maybe make the proper referrals to get these people help.
That's a good point, because what you brought up about stockpiling the medications or stopping that, I'm sure there's people out there who have lost, a loved one going, wait a minute now. Yeah, they did find mom in bed a few days later. I wonder, Mm-hmm. I mean, I know of people that has happened to, and you kind of, now I'm thinking maybe, I'm not sure,
There'll be some people you'll never know.
No.
But, there's no way of knowing. I had a meeting, or actually met with the Christian Community Coalition yesterday, and I was so pleased to have the religious community gather and be willing to discuss it. When Daniel Robert, my first son, died, we weren't there. It was in '96. Churches were not up to speed on suicide and what it meant, and which was particularly devastating to my mother, who was very devout Catholic, and that was just like a second wound to her, which made me very, very upset. So I am so heartened by the whole religious community coming together, being willing to address it, and actually we're working with the coalition to put on a community training that will be informational, will include QPR training. We don't have it all ironed out yet, but we hope to have that going in a couple months.
I like the idea of doing that, and I like the idea of having care professionals that are caring for our seniors be trained in this. That's something I hadn't never really thought about, but it's so important because we're the people that are out there. We see them day in and day out, and we see the depression and all of that, and we need to be aware of those signs.
And there are a lot of them. So many of the so-called healthcare professionals and providers, they'll know 3 or 4 symptoms or signs or behaviors. Just right here, I've got a list of 16 items that should, people working with seniors or with all people should certainly be trained and be aware of, because they didn't know that they were symptoms. Unfortunately, over the years, I've done a number of funerals for suicide victims, and quite often you get invited to the home. They have food,
Mm-hmm.
and people will ask me, well, gee, and they start asking questions about suicide, and I used to start telling them all of the symptomology to look for. And then I found out that they all went into depression and guilt because I should
Because they saw them.
recognize it. They didn't know it was a sign or a warning sign,
Could be.
and could
A
be.
lot of them could be. There's 16 there. None of them guarantee that person is suicidal because
No.
we're all different. But they are indicators
Yeah, and
that
that's
it's
just-
something to look for. They might be.
if you get enough road signs, you should investigate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If it, the way I approach it is if it enters my mind, I ask.
Yes.
Period. No discussion, no maybe you should, maybe you're being silly. Nope, none of that. If it pops into my mind, I ask.
And I could see, because I know a lot of seniors that, like you were talking about, are in their homes. They don't come out. They're homebound. Nobody sees them. Their families aren't here.
Yep.
And they're probably going through that, and no one's there to check up on them to see what's going on. You see them come out and pick up their paper in the morning or come out to their mailbox, and that's it.
The problem is our society doesn't have a place for them. And I don't know how we address that as a culture or a society. I can see that situation with a senior person, but I don't have a way to fix it.
And we don't have the systems in place to always go check on them. I mean, how many times you always laugh about, I've fallen and can't get up and I don't have the button or whatever, but this is the same thing.
It is.
I'm hurting and no one's coming to my rescue.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we need more people trained, even the guys and the ladies that run out are volunteers, and they're doing Meals on Wheels. They have enough exposure. If they start spotting something, then they can do something about it. It's imperative that we do it, because even Dr. Quinnett, and I'm sure you'll agree, if recognized and approached, suicide is very, very preventable. Very, very, very preventable. But if you don't recognize it and don't intervene, it's not, they're not going to stop. So you need to talk to the people, and with the right approach, very, very preventable. In fact, one of the things that Dr. Quinnett taught us in school, the most jumped off bridge in the world is the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. More people committed suicides there than any place in the world.
And if you see someone standing on it,
Yeah, do something. But
they're probably going to do that.
There's research there have been a number of people, like 20, 30 people, who have survived the fall. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more did not survive it. And it's kind of a backup to suicide is preventable. They interviewed the survivors, and all but one of them so far, or maybe now it's a little different, my information is a little bit old and dated, but when they talked to the survivors, every one of them said the minute they jumped, they wished they hadn't. They changed their mind. That jump was the intervention. So their minds can be changed, but we need to recognize it and be able to ask the question. And there's a number of ways to ask that question. Do it tactfully. She knows how, I know how. I've seen police officers and even ministers and chaplains come up with something like, "Oh, you're not going to kill yourself, are you?"
Oh,
that's
that's-
not the right approach.
That's because the answer is going to be no.
Yeah, none of your business. Or something. But there's enough training out there. The more people we get trained, the more lives we're going to save.
I really like that idea of training our healthcare professionals that do come out to the people's homes. Even the Meals on Wheels or the Jumpin' Bean people that I talked to last week, they're out there seeing the people. I think that's a fantastic idea to train
And
them.
it can often take so little to turn the tide. One of the gentlemen that did survive jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge said that when he headed out to go to the bridge, as he walked, he kept coming, okay, if one person just smiles at me, I won't do it today. And then as he got closer, he was crying. And so there were tears running down his face. If one person will just say something, I won't do it today. I won't do it. And he said a number of people walked by him Nobody said a word.
Wow.
Not one word. In fact, one person did come up to him and he thought to himself, oh my God, she's here.
Someone's here to save me.
Do it. And she asked for directions. And either somehow did not notice this man with tears streaming down his face that she was asking directions to.
Wow.
And sometimes it only takes one word. If we've got the time, I'll tell you a very quick story about a gal in California who started a program, was pinning a little ribbon on people's chests saying who I am is, neat, and it's a positive approach to things. And there's a story in one of the self-help books. Can't think of the name of it. A guy at work, his boss came and gave him one of these ribbons and says he was an important person and thought he was really great. And he gave the guy a couple more ribbons to pass on. And the guy got home and called his 16-year-old son. He said, come here, son, I want to talk to you. He said, what is it? He pinned a little ribbon on him. And he said, I was thinking about who to give this away. The boss thinks I'm great. And so I'm going to give you one of these. I think you're great. And he said, in fact, my son, I haven't told you, but I love you. And the boy broke down, started crying. And the father didn't know why he was crying. And the boy said, I was going to kill myself.
Oh, my goodness. Well,
But now that you said, I love you, I don't have to.
yeah, it is very, the dark place does have a light switch
It does, absolutely.
you can turn on. I'm thinking, I keep going back of some of the people whose homes I've been in and still talking about the medications. I remember walking into homes where they probably have 50 or 60 bottles of medications all scattered around various rooms that they've saved in case they need them sometime,
Well, a doctor will prescribe something and then there's side effects, so then a week later they prescribe something else. Well, you've already got 30 days of the first one. Now we're into the second one, and that one has side effects too, so they prescribe you something else. It's easier than you think to end up with a whole cabinet.
Oh, yeah.
And they're very, seniors tend to be very possessive of them too. Those are mine. I might need them.
I might need them. I will save them. Even though they're outdated, I might need them.
Yep. It's very difficult to convince people to let you dispose of them.
And it isn't just medications and drugs. One of the things we try to learn and we're working with people is look at the approach and try to, if you think there's a problem, provide a safe environment. And that also would include talking to the people, and particularly the males. Do you have a gun? Get that gun. Give it to a relative, hold it for them, make it, something that's okay with them. But get that environment as safe as absolutely possible. Because there are other methods of suicide other than just pills.
Right.
Removing the ammunition is effective. Yes, people can go buy more, but suicide ideology tends to be fairly impulsive, and it's not really long. It's not long lasting.
The impulse itself to
actually pull the trigger
is just very
fairly
short.
short-lived.
The thought of it could be long, but the actual
right.
Okay.
So if you're worried and you've taken ammunition away, which is what I've done in several instances, at least that slows it down
and gives you time to
right. They can't just walk in, pop a bullet in, and make it happen. Because they think they have them, but they don't. So that is an effective way of, because I've worked with people, they have 27 or 30 guns. Well, it's a big deal to take all that away.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one thing I did find out is that every law enforcement office does have a room where they will catalog and store firearms for people. I work in the mental health field, and I have done that once before and discovered it with a gentleman who was suicidal. I convinced him to give me his gun, only it turned out to be 32 of them.
Okay.
And then I had a whole trunk full of guns, and I'm like...
Driving around town.
I know, going, okay, now what do I do? I call my local city police, and they're like, sure, no problem, bring them down. They were wonderful. They asked no questions. They just cataloged them, serial numbers, everything, and then when we went back and said things are stabilized. So I mean, there was no threat, nothing you had to prove, but it was a safe, secure place where they wouldn't be stolen or
Right.
ruined or things that people worry about with their firearms.
That's interesting because I've had that same discussion with families who are dealing with someone with dementia and Alzheimer's, and the fear of having the guns in the home, that they may not only do something to them, but
Right.
to the other people in the house, and we're trying to figure out what to do with them.
This was a huge room, probably, I don't know, 15 by 20. I mean, it was a big room, and it was full. And they had a very effective procedure for it. They were totally supportive because they want those guns somewhere safe, not where there's someone who might be unstable.
Right.
And I never dreamed, and they told me every single law enforcement main office has one.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, I need to take one more break, but we're going to continue talking, and we've got a memorial walk. You just slid some information to me, so when we come back, we're going to talk about that. You've been listening to The Senior Moment. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I can't either, but I'm there.
After 3 heart attacks, my cardiologist said no sit and watch.
Well, you could come and sit and watch and help with registration.
Volunteer registration.
Yep, it is.
Back
Okay.
when I just went up working on the spots up there.
Right. Yeah, I remember.
Okay. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. And we're back. Welcome back. Again, this is Connie Clark with Home Helpers, and we are on the Senior Moment. We're talking with Catherine Perouse, who drove all the way down here from Sandpoint to be with us today. And she is from the Suicide Prevention Action Network, and I want you to talk about what that is also. And also we're talking to Al Holm, who is our local Post Falls suicide information expert. I got to come up with a title for you, Al. Come on now. And you had given me a flyer here. It says Walk to Prevent Suicide. And it's Saturday, October 13th. Where is this going to be now?
We'll be leaving from O'Shea's. That's where we have registration. And then we walk down the Centennial Trail and back for a total of 3.8 miles. We have T-shirts. It's to raise awareness, reduce stigma, also to memorialize the people we have lost. Some years last year we had a very large high school contingency because of the deaths that the area had experienced. You can have T-shirts with pictures put on the back, or we have our standard ones with signs, and it's just to raise awareness within the community that suicide is a problem. It's here, and we need to talk about it to reduce it.
And is this a fundraising? This is a fundraiser.
It is.
Where do the funds go for
They
this?
stay here. It's strictly in North Idaho. We are the only suicide prevention walk where 100% of the funding stays here. This year we did excuse me, we did a mental health professional training so that our mental health professionals in the area were right up with evidence-based practices, the latest and greatest techniques.
Okay. And so this goes for education programs and stuff like that in the area. And the Suicide Prevention Action Network, what is that?
It is it was a national group, and we had a state affiliate, and then we had varying chapters around the state. The national organization merged with AFSP, I believe, and so there no longer is a national one, but we in Idaho had our own 401, whatever it is.
Charitable organization.
Right. Nonprofit status. And we chose to keep the name.
Okay.
We do lobbying with the legislature, awareness activities around the state. We were an intricate part of the new suicide prevention plan for Idaho that came out in 2011. Just do a lot of things throughout the state.
Okay.
To raise awareness mostly. We are not a crisis network at all. We've been very helpful. We've been a part of the effort to get the Idaho Suicide Hotline back up, which it will be opening this fall. The executive director was hired. For the last 2 years, I believe, we've been the only state in the nation that did not have a state hotline. All of the calls that went to the national hotline were routed through Portland. Portland tries, but they're a long ways from Idaho.
Yeah.
And I've received calls from the Portland hotline for someone in Rigby, long ways from me.
Yeah.
I don't know the resources. So having a state hotline is a huge step forward, absolutely huge. So we're so thankful that that has occurred. So we've been a part of that. We hope to we're trying to get a billboard we want to put up about suicide prevention. But they're really expensive. So
Yes, they are. I've priced them too.
yes, so we're working on that. But this is about the only fundraising event that we have. And then we try to do training for both the community and then for mental health professionals, and try to do really top-notch trainings that might not come to this part of the state as a rule.
If someone wanted to get involved in this, how would they? What would they do? Just give you a call or something? I mean, you have monthly meetings or something.
We do.
Okay.
Normally we meet the third Friday of every month at 3 o'clock at Kootenai Medical Center in the Fox Auditorium. This month, because of a whole bunch of things, we are actually meeting today, this Friday, which it'd be a day late, but it's normally the third Friday. Or they are welcome to call me or to email me for more information.
Okay. So that would be the number here, 208 290 6161.
Yes.
And if they want information, you have a website, it looks like.
We do.
It's spanidaho.org, spanidaho.org.
Yes.
And is there resource information on there?
There is. There's resource information. There's statistical information. There's local chapter information for this whole entire state. It's an excellent website, and there's just a whole myriad of information there.
Okay. And I know, Al, you have some information also on things going on in education pieces that are available around the area.
And I'll eventually come up with more access to it through website stuff, which we haven't established yet. But we're working on that issue.
But you have some training programs and things like that too, right? Yeah. So there is help out there. If you see somebody that is down in that hole, how can they find the list of questions to ask?
It's available on the SPAN website.
Okay.
It's one of the first things on the main page. It's under warning signs.
Okay.
And on that page, it also lists risk and protective factors. So things like the risk would be becoming widowed, finding out about a serious illness, those types of things. Kind of similar to the warning signs, but a little different, because they can be things like losing a job, those kind of retirement.
Okay. So those are life events
Right.
that might trigger something.
Right. And then protective factors would be supporting family. They can identify, it also identifies the things that can be supported to someone who is considering suicide.
Okay.
And one of the things that I would like to briefly mention, QPR works. When people get trained and he can spot this and make interventions. Last spring, I did a QPR training session in one of the local high schools. And that night, one of the high school students called me. His girlfriend had moved from here to California, and she was devastated by the move. And about 8 o'clock at night, he got an email from her. She was talking as she wanted to kill herself, and she sent a picture of her left arm, which had been slashed several times. And he said, "What do I do?" So I got all the information I could possibly get from him, and I very quickly called the police department in the town where she was, gave them everything I had. I don't know how they did it, but they found her.
Wow.
And they called me back in a couple hours, said, yeah, we found her. They got her to the hospital and sewed her up and saved her life. She got counseling, and later on, the counseling worked. So this stuff does save lives. It absolutely saves lives. And one of the things in talking earlier you talked about, if we talk to people, ask the question and so forth, I have found one of the most important counseling techniques that I ever used is, for God's sake, be honest with people. If you're a phony, they'll spot you 10 miles away. So be honest with people. And with that training, there's one other issue that you may already have in all your stuff. And it's learning the mythology about suicide. There are a lot of myths out there about suicide that don't help anybody. Quickly, some of them, the people that talk about suicide never commit suicide. Wrong. They've had failed attempts, and once they tried and didn't work, they'll never try again. Wrong. If all of a sudden your suicide suspect, they've been depressed, they've been this, they've been that, and all of a sudden things change, and wow, now they're upbeat and they're happy and everything is fine, suicide issue is over with. Wrong. They probably made the decision, know when they're going to do it, how they're going to do it.
And they feel better about it.
Problem's over, and they feel better. Once decided that they're going to complete their suicide, nothing can stop them. That's wrong. Suicide is extremely treatable and curable. Suicide runs in families, not necessarily. If someone in the family completed a suicide, it can make the probability a little higher for other, but it's not something that runs in family like diabetes.
And that's what you brought up.
No.
Right.
It's not genetic in nature.
Okay.
And there are a lot
But
of
the
people-
emotions there.
It's the desensitization.
Yeah.
That's an
Okay.
acceptable solution.
Okay.
And there are a lot of people, and when I was a police chaplain, a lot of police officers, but well, they didn't leave a note, so it's not suicide. Only 1 in every 4 leaves a note.
Really?
And there's some other methodologies I won't go through now, but as well as learning the warning signs and the symptoms, we need to learn the mythology about it, so we don't make a mistake in making a decision.
And what you said about the note, I mean, if you watch TV, well, they didn't leave a note. Oh, it wasn't, but I guess that's not necessarily the case.
Right. And I mean, for years we were all taught, well, don't say it. You might give them the idea.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, well, how silly. It's not like you're going to say it and they're going to go, gosh.
Ooh, I hadn't thought of
I
that.
hadn't thought of that idea. Man, that's what I'll do. I'll kill myself.
Yeah.
Another thing we've done is we try to moderate how we refer to suicide. If you'll notice, I've said completed suicides versus committed. Committed indicates a sin, committing a crime, very negative things. There's nothing negative about these people. They're not bad people. They're not, they're hurting. So in an effort to make it less accusing, quite often the appropriate way, or the politically correct way, is to say completed or died by. And it doesn't insinuate that there's some type of guilt on the part of the person who may have died by suicide.
And the person who's thinking about it, they probably do have a lot of guilt because that's a sin.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're struggling with that in their mind.
It is very difficult.
Do I commit a sin and be rid of this pain, or do I not commit a sin and still be living with it?
Strong spirituality, a strong connection to a religion is a protective factor, because all of the religions are very, it's a sin. It's not the right thing to do. God doesn't want you to do that. So that is a protective factor, which makes it that much more difficult, which is good. We want it to be difficult.
Exactly.
And I think it's very important to, even though we've said this before, it's important to talk to people about it. There was a case in one of the suicidology magazines that I got years ago. A young boy who had attempted suicide, and he didn't complete the suicide, but he made the attempt, pretty serious attempt, wound up in the hospital. And in the conversation, the interviews with him afterwards, one of the nurses or doctors or somebody asked him, said, "Why didn't you tell somebody?" He said, "Because nobody asked."
Very good point. Very good point. And let's leave it at that. You need to ask. If you suspect it, you need to ask, you need to go on this website, look at the warning signs, look at the life factors that could trigger something like that, and get help for that person, because otherwise they will complete it. And then you're going to feel so much worse that you had those thoughts and you didn't do anything. Also, we're going to talk about on Saturday, October 13th, go be at O'Shea's and start the walk to prevent suicide. And go on their website, which is SPAN, Idaho.org. Find out more information, come to the meetings, learn what's going on. But ask. If you think it's going to happen, ask. Any last thoughts?
Nope. Thank you very much for having us on and helping get this word out.
Well, and I thank you. And I'm going to pursue your idea about getting the healthcare professionals trained. I think our professional caregivers and health personnel need to know those signs. And so I'm going to work on that.
Okay, and certainly there are enough people here that are more than qualified to train gatekeepers and so forth.
Absolutely.
It's available if people just want it.
Absolutely. I'm going to do that. Well, you all have a wonderful afternoon after this depressing conversation, but if it saves one person, it is totally worth it. You have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next weekend. This has been Connie Clark with the Senior Moment.